Welcome to our learning theory discussion on behaviorism. There's one of the key behaviorists, B.F. Skinner. One of the key elements that behaviorists pointed out around the turn of the century that differed from the main theory of psychology, which was psychoanalysis at the time, was that we should study observable behavior. Instead of trying to figure out what was happening internally with the learners, we should instead focus our attention on what was observable. And that's one of the key tenets of behaviorism. Behaviorists also point out that it's the environment that shapes behavior and therefore learning. Elements, whether they're planned or unplanned, that we interact with in the environment shape what we know and what we learn. And therefore, it's the job of the instructor to design environments that will shape the behavior of our learners in the ways that we want them shaped. There are two key principles in behaviorism that are critical. One is contiguity, and that's how close two elements that happen in a learner's environment happen together so that we can associate them together. And that's important because of the second principle, which is reinforcement, which if we have an experience in our environment and then we have a positive reinforcement or a negative reinforcement, we associate those two. Contiguity means if they happen close together, then we have more likelihood of having that positive experience and that positive reinforcement be associated by the learner. Here are a few of the major behaviorists. Edward Thorndike researched around the turn of the 1900s, forwarded SR theory, and that's stimulus equals response. Thorndike thought that if a stimulus was repeated over and over and over, sooner or later the learner would then elicit the correct response. It's sort of the foundation of behaviorism. Building on Thorndike, Pavlov in Russia forwarded the concept of reinforcement. Now in SR theory, a stimulus is repeated over and over again until the desired response happens. Pavlov said that if you reinforce a stimulus with a positive act, then the learner is much more likely to associate the stimulus with the response. So Pavlov, in his famous experiment, rang a bell. The desired response was that the dog would come. The reinforcement was that Pavlov would give the dog food when they came, when they heard the bell. And therefore, the food was the positive reinforcement. The dog learned that if they came by hearing the stimulus, which was the bell, they would get fed. Therefore, they associated food with the bell, and that reinforcement helps to elicit the response of the dog coming. B.F. Skinner then built on Pavlov and forwarded the concept of operant conditioning. Now, you have to have reinforcement for operant conditioning, and what Skinner said is that you reinforce the behaviors that you want to happen again, and you ignore the behaviors that you don't want to happen again. Therefore, if the dog comes when the bell rings, you reinforce that with food. Well, if the dog does something like run away when he hears the bell, you just ignore it, and you only concentrate on positive reinforcement of the behavior that you are looking for. Operant conditioning is sort of the crux of where behaviorism stands today. So what do behaviorists think about learning? Well, they view the learning process as a change in behavior. A child in their class learning multiplication tables changes behavior by acquiring the concepts of multiplication. How do they acquire the concepts of multiplication? Well, the teacher has an exercise to go through the multiplication tables over and over again. That's stimulus. Through operant conditioning and positive reinforcement, a child starts to associate praise with correct answers, and therefore the change in behavior comes through this interaction of the activity, the drill that goes over and over again, the stimulus, and the positive conditioning, the change in behavior is understanding multiplication. The locus of learning, where does learning happen? Well, learning happens in the environment. It's not happening in the child's mind, the behaviorists say. It's happening through the child's interaction with the environment, with the positive reinforcement, and with the exercises. What's the purpose of learning? Instructors are trying to create behavioral change in the desired directions. We want our children to know multiplication tables, and therefore we create an environment and activities that give them the correct stimulus the positive reinforcement to help them change their behavior. The instructor's role, like I said, is to create that environment to elicit the desired response. So how do we know whether a change of behavior has occurred? Well, contemporary behaviorists have put a large focus on assessment and evaluation. Current movements in behaviorism, such as No Child Left Behind, have put a strong focus in testing as a mode to determine whether the appropriate change in behavior has occurred. So by using some sort of evaluation instrument like a standardized test, we're able to determine what the appropriate change in behavior is, or what that benchmark is, and then assess each learner to see whether the appropriate change in behavior has been elicited. Thanks for watching and listening.